Okay, so let's see if we start to see the attendees come in. There we go.
And Danielle, I can keep an eye on attendees and admit.
Yeah, that's
So
fair.
you don't have to worry about that, but.
Okay, I think they're all coming in automatically. But yeah, I appreciate that. So
14.
welcome. We're just letting people come into the room while we wait, and we'll get started with the Housing Advisory Committee meeting in a few minutes.
What do you got on your screen behind you, Matt? Looks like a drawing, or is that something you guys are working on?
Yeah, I'm looking for my most Mill Valley friendly development background. That one's all about Boy and Diaz, right? There you go, a little better shot.
Yeah, it looks nice.
This is some housing for the developmentally disabled out in Livermore that's about 2/3 built.
Yeah, nice. Looks good. We don't
Yeah.
allow white buildings in Mill Valley. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but somebody on the planning commission knows this rule, right? No white buildings.
So again, welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes here and let people start rolling into the meeting. We had about 45 register, and I see we're up to about 19. So maybe just
That's nice. I
few
like
more
that one.
seconds here, and we can start.
I'm a big fan of overhangs. I always think that looks nice, the little shadow it creates.
This one's down in Aptos, so nice density for our neck of the woods.
That looks good. I like that one. Are we in front of everybody right now, Danielle, or not?
Yes, everyone's rolling into the meeting, so they're just waiting for us to begin. And when you also do your welcome, you should probably also mention the changing of the guard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very important. That means you, Stephen.
Yeah. So I think we could probably get started.
You getting going?
Sure.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. My name is Urban Carmel. I'm with Mill Valley City Council. You are at the Housing Advisory Committee, which goes by the acronym HAC, or pronounced HAC. And this is our 5th meeting to discuss the Mill Valley housing element. We are going to start with a roll call to make sure that we're all here. And I'm going to call out your name, and you're going to say here. And we'll see if everybody's present. I'll start with Greg Hildebrand.
Here.
John Yolis.
Here.
Stephen Burke.
Here.
And Matt Franklin.
Here.
Amazing. All 5 of us are here, so we have a quorum. Great. So the next item on the agenda is public open time. And this is an opportunity for anybody who's on the call to raise your virtual hand and make a comment about an item which is not on tonight's agenda. So if your comment is about the housing element, this is not the time to speak. If your comment is about some item of importance to the city, which is not on the agenda, now is your opportunity to do that. So do we have anybody that is raising their hands right now?
I see Clayton Smith has raised his hand. And for anyone that's on a telephone call, it's *9 if you'd like to raise your hand through the telephone feature. So Clayton, I'm going to allow you to talk here if you want to address the committee, and you have 2 minutes to do so. But again, it's related not to the agendized item.
Good. You can hear me right now?
I can.
Okay. During the talk about housing affordability, the focus is almost exclusively on supply and demand dynamics in the various local marketplaces. Little attention has been paid to the role of interest rates and their effect on stimulating or depressing demand for home ownership. Today's rise in mortgage interest rates from below 3% to above 5% is likely to change this, as recent home buyers who shoehorn themselves into property purchase using variable rate financing are soon to find out. Even less attention has been paid to the virtue of Proposition 13 in promoting community stability and the desirability of maintaining and improving the homes in aging neighborhoods. In conflict with this, the tax collector benefits greatly from residential turnover during a time of rising home prices. Capital gains taxes from house price appreciation are one of the principal reasons for the state's recent budget surpluses. However, what is not being discussed at all is rising replacement costs in the emerging economic landscape of non-transitory inflation brought on by the Fed's profligate money printing during the ongoing Operation COVID. Consequently, house prices are likely to stay high or continuing increases as builders face the dual impacts of a lack of skilled labor on the one hand and construction material shortages on the other. As long as replacement costs exceed market prices going forward, house prices are going to stay high, stay firm, and likely to continue to increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton. Okay. And that is all I have. So,
Okay, great. Thank you, Clayton, for your comment. There's no other comment or nobody else raising their hands for public open time. So we're going to close public open time. And we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the main event, the housing element meeting. So a couple announcements. First of all, you'll notice that John McCauley is not on this phone call. And why is that? Well, John, as it turns out, has reached the end of his term on the city council. He'll be retiring from the city council at the end of June. And John has been the chair of the HAC, and we are making a transition. So from now on the HAC, you'll be seeing myself, and I've been on it already, and a new face, which is Stephen Burke, who is down at 3 p.m. on my screen, at least. He might be on a different element of the clock on your screen, but that's where he is. Stephen, why don't you give us a wave? Okay, there he is. So you'll be seeing Stephen from now on, and we all welcome him here. And of course, we'll have him speak first since he is the new guy on the block. So that is some housekeeping. So tonight's meeting, we're going to talk about programs and policies that will help us meet our housing objectives and to fulfill our housing element goals. I want to just start by repeating some of the comments I've made in prior meetings, just to kind of set the table for everybody about what we're trying to do here. So again, this is the 5th time we're meeting to talk about the housing element. The housing element is one of 7 elements that are part of the city's general plan, right? So the city operates under a general plan, and we need to provide various elements, of which housing is one. It is a legal requirement, and there are very stiff financial penalties if we are not successful in creating a housing element. There are also, more importantly, perhaps a loss of local control if we do not pass a housing element. So it's very important that we do this. As I've mentioned in the past, the very unique thing about the current housing element is that it is without a doubt the most challenging one that our city and any city in the state of California has ever faced. And what I mean by that is that, for example, in the city of Mill Valley, we have something called the RHNA, which is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that says how many housing units we need to allow to be permitted over the next 8 years, which is the cycle for the housing element. And the city of Mill Valley's RHNA number is going up by 600%. It is roughly 900 units when you include a buffer that the state is requiring. So it's a very challenging situation that us and many other cities face in terms of finding room in our cities for the amount of housing that the city wants or the state wants us to create. Also of note is that half of those units need to be affordable to people with income below the area median income. So we need to create a lot of affordable housing. And this will be a good thing for our city. It'll be a good thing for other cities. For example, we will be able to create room in our communities for diversity and for people that work nearby in Mill Valley and the surrounding communities. Fortunately, Mill Valley has got a very proud history of being successful at meeting its RHNA numbers. We are one of only 2 cities in all of Marin that successfully created enough or successfully permitted enough units in the current RHNA cycle. So we have a very proud history of creating enough housing units in Mill Valley, something that we're very proud of. And we will do certainly our very best to do so in the current cycle as well. Mill Valley is a difficult city in which to create new housing. Why is that? Well, first of all, we are 97% built out, and the remaining 3% has got a slope of about 40%, which is very, very difficult to build upon. Secondly, about 86% of the parcels in Mill Valley are either in a high fire severity zone or in a floodplain. So it's a very difficult place to build houses in a safe place as well. Thirdly, about 35% of our roads are less than 16 feet wide. And why is 16 feet wide important? Because that's the minimum width that you need for a fire truck to go down. So a lot of our roads, as I'm sure everybody is fully aware, are very narrow, and it's hard to add more density on those streets. And then finally, we know that a lot of the housing needs to go on the major transit corridors, like, for example, Blythedale and Miller. But as we've discovered, and as in the staff report, about 85% of those parcels are less than half an acre. So many of those parcels are very small, and also a challenge to build upon, at least in terms of creating any kind of density that allows affordability. And again, affordability is a lot of what we're trying to create in Mill Valley. So we have a number of pretty significant constraints. That's why we've had a number of housing element meetings. That's why we've been working on very creative solutions to create housing in Mill Valley, and we're going to continue that discussion tonight. So tonight is going to run similar to other meetings. We're going to start with a staff presentation by Danielle. She's going to go through, if I'm not mistaken, the document that we've all seen and read and studied very closely. So that's the first thing that will happen. Secondly, members of the Housing Advisory Committee, that's the 4 of you that are on the screen here with me, you will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff, not to deliberate, ask questions of staff. Anything that's not clear in that document, that will be the second item that we'll cover off. Thirdly, members of the public, thank you for attending. You are an important part of tonight's discussion. The third part of tonight's meeting is going to be an opportunity for all of you to chime in on the programs and policies that you want to see the city pursue in order to reach its housing element goals. So we'll give you time to talk about those things and to provide your input into the process. And then finally, and the fourth part is going to be the members of the Housing Advisory Committee to go through each one of these sections that we've received and to provide any other commentary that you would like to provide on it, any additional programs that you would like to see, in other words. As you saw in the document, there are 8 sections, 8 different goals. We're going to go through them one by one. I'm going to ask you what, if anything, you want to add onto that. And then this is the really important part, and this is a bit of a surprise, so now pay attention so that you do this correctly. I'm also, at the end of the whole meeting, when we are all done with everything, I'm going to ask you for 3 or 4 of the items that we've talked about that you feel are the most important. So as we go through each one of these 8 goals, maybe circle on your document, like, this is a really important thing. I want to make sure we do this thing. And when we're done, the last thing we'll do is we'll just very quickly go through and identify what everybody thinks are those 3 or 4 things individually. That'll give us some sense of prioritization for what we want to pursue in terms of programs and policies going forward. I think this will be a good way of focusing staff and our commissions on actually getting this work done. So hopefully that's all understandable and easy to comprehend. And with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Danielle for her presentation.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. Here we go. Here. Let me just get set up here. Great. Okay. Just thinking about going into presentation mode. Okay, great. So just quickly, I'd like to make sure everyone's established and we have the same basically framework and understanding that, the housing element is one of the required elements or chapters of a general plan. The general plan is basically the guiding document and policy document for the city in terms of thinking about the future and planning for the future. There's two overarching goals in the general plan. One is to protect and enhance the natural beauty and small town character of Mill Valley, while also encouraging the continued diversity of housing, income levels, and lifestyles within the community. So there's several elements that talk to and support these two main goals. They include community vitality, land use, noise, safety, open space, and environmental preservation, and housing and transportation. So the housing element specifically has a lot more requirements and is closely monitored by the state of California. It occurs every 8 years as part of an update, and the Northern California region, specifically Marin County, the Bay Area Association of Governments, we're all in the process of updating our housing elements. So there's components that are required as part of the housing element that will be adopted with the document. It includes a housing needs assessment. We've talked about that before as part of the first workshop. Our housing element website page has information on housing needs. We'll talk about some of those tonight. A sites inventory that addresses how we plan to meet our regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA. And housing plan, which also supports the housing inventory and the needs of the community. A constraints analysis that's also put together to identify any constraints you have and where you can reduce those constraints, which again then go back to these goals and policies to help alleviate those constraints. Reviewing implementation of what we've done in the last housing element. And then this is all encompassed through community engagement as part of updating our housing element. There are a lot of different things. There are a lot of changes this cycle. So I think we've talked about those at length before. So tonight, and as part of the workshop that we did, housing, the fourth workshop, we really focused on this idea of housing programs. We currently have 38 programs. I'm proud to say that we've addressed all of them. We're either working on them, and a lot of them have been completed or ongoing. So the idea is there's goals and policies. The goals, as part of talking through the housing element and asking various questions, we're in good shape with our goals and policies based on what we've heard from the community. Now we're working on updating the programs to really make sure that we solidify our goals and the overarching goals of the general plan. Again, going back to supporting different lifestyles and incomes within the community, as well as balancing the character of Mill Valley. So tonight we're talking about building upon the existing programs, updating the programs, addressing housing needs, removing the barriers, further fair housing, promoting diversity and inclusion as part of furthering fair housing, and including any required programs to address meeting our housing numbers. So just quickly, there has been a lot of community input. I thank all of you for being here tonight, as well as a lot of input that has occurred throughout the online workshops and 2 surveys that were completed. So there are programs of interest, and based on input from the community, it's helped us get to where we are today in terms of the programs and working towards the sites inventory, which went pretty smoothly based on input from the community. You'll see there is interest in equitable housing and supporting fair housing while also limiting growth in environmental areas, concerns about evacuation and fire hazards, so things like that. So we're really working on those areas of interest that we can do more, and that's supported in our programs that we'll talk about here. So the third dynamic that we have at play is the Housing Advisory Committee, and you've been in place for several years and have priorities and have actually established this great set of strategies, which I'll call them. And I refer to them as buckets. So there's 8 goals, there's also just 4 buckets. So if everyone wants to think about the 4 buckets, it's pretty easy. When we're looking to protect and preserve our existing housing, trying to diversify and enhance our affordability, and we are trying to expand to create more units while also then targeting the housing needs of our community. So those are the big pictures that we're looking at as part of the policy development. The priorities that had been established by the Housing Advisory Committee has been to move swiftly and do what we can to increase supply of affordable housing. That's how we thought about the home match program as something that we can get on the ground fast running to open doors, protect the rental housing we have. We're working on a soft story ordinance with understanding that we don't want to see any natural hazards such as an earthquake take out existing rental housing. And then also considering public land to leverage affordable housing. And the last year has been spent on that effort with coming up with the One Hamilton site and working towards looking to produce affordable housing on the northern portion of that site. So with that, some questions we asked at the workshop were, again, what existing programs can we expand on? What do we need to address in terms of community needs, and what programs can we create to have a more inclusive, welcoming community that provides equal and fair housing? So attachment 1 has a check mark by those programs that were talked about at the workshop 4, and I have incorporated some comments. And then there's an arrow bullet for those that might need more discussion. So I'm not going to go through all of these now. I think we can do that as part of the discussion, but I'm going to go over the 4 buckets. So there's protecting housing that goes from historic preservation to maintenance to also really trying to look at how we can keep our housing stock intact. I think program number 3 is probably the biggest one. We might, as I move forward and develop the draft, I might put this into two or 3 programs, but the idea is let's not lose what we have. We can potentially require one-to-one replacement of units. We'd like to strengthen our lot consolidation regulations with the understanding that we're seeing more wealthy individuals and households come into the community that are interested in consolidating what are 2 lots right now, and they want to consolidate it to 1, estate building kind of things, how we can make sure that we keep the housing that we have in stock. And then the other item that has been talked about a lot is the idea of short-term rentals. In my staff report, I think I mentioned there's approximately 100 short-term rentals registered. Right now, there's actually 81. So at the top is typically there's about 100, but right now we have about 80. Right now, of all those living accommodations that are allowed, about 7% of that rental stock is short-term rental. And I'll also remind everyone that short-term rentals are only allowed in single-family areas. They're not allowed in the multi-family or commercial areas. The second bucket is enhancing affordability and diversifying our housing stock. So why diversify? Diversifying housing stock helps create some opportunity. There's this new word also calling that's referred to as housing mobility, which allows people to have housing choices within the community. Aging in place is good, but sometimes people would like to downsize or move, or in the opposite example, also move into a larger house to provide a family. Those dynamics are difficult when you're housing, if you're priced out of the housing market and can't move either to downsize or change your lifestyle. So with that, how do we diversify? Well, we have about 75% of our parcels and also our housing stock is about the same ratio, is related to single family housing. So that's clear. That large percentage means that we need to diversify those single family zones. So we do have programs that are doing that. We have ADUs, JADUs now, and now with state laws, we're allowing also duplexes in those areas. So that is helpful in diversifying single family zoned areas. We also have a household size of about 2-ish people, and we have a large portion of households that live alone, about 28%. But when you look at our housing stock, only 17% of our housing stock is small in terms of less than 2-bedroom units. So there's a little disconnect in terms of the size of the houses versus the household size. So this is an opportunity to address that issue. We have a lot of small non-vacant lots, which Councilmember Cornell mentioned, and a lot of our land, we need to be careful, is in an area that we are concerned about potential threats with fire and evacuation. So to diversify, we have several different options and programs ranging from mixed use to micro units, and adaptive reuse was something we heard from the community. So I thank you for that. We've incorporated that as reusing basically top floor office space in commercial areas. And if you look in our, actually, I should change the picture. There are, especially on East Blythedale, if you look at our commercial buildings, they actually started as homes and have been converted to office spaces. So it makes sense that maybe there's some converting back to what the original use was, which is housing. In addition to diversifying, we're also looking to enhance our affordability. There's a plethora of ways of doing that. Can do that through inclusionary housing, which requires a certain amount of number of affordable units to be built in a private development. So those right now, 4 units of more must build at least 25% of units as affordable. There's also ways of incentivizing certain development, creating partnerships and home buyer assistance, as well as rental assistance. More units is the third bucket. So how do we get more units? Well, we know that we have a lot of land that's already been used, a lot of parcels that are up in the very high fire severity zone and are very narrow roadways, and a lot of small parcels. So we have to think creatively, and we have, and I thank you all for helping us do so. So our design guidelines are there to help us make sure we're maintaining our community character and style, I guess. And then we have to, by law, maintain our capacity and our sites inventory. And lastly, we need to rezone in order to make sure that we can accommodate our housing and the site's inventory. But we're doing that very creatively, like I mentioned. So there's 3 overlays that we will be adopting as part of the housing element. They include a small lot overlay, and these are mainly lots that are in the commercial area that are less than a ½ acre, that are small. We've had a lot of interest in potentially building, but the owners can't redevelop and get basically what they already have on the premises because of the lot configuration, the size, the parking requirements. So the idea is to provide an incentive to increase the density for those that are willing to build smaller scale units that are 1,000 square feet or less. They'll have reduced parking standards, increased height standards, and increased densities. And then also waiving that inclusionary fee, or not fee, but inclusionary requirement, again, for this idea of facilitating these smaller lots. There's interest in the community in seeing more of the small scale lots, like the example here, where you have, this is actually over density. It only has 1 parking space per unit, but it's definitely the scale and size and character that we're looking for in Mill Valley. The office conversion overlay, similar, of being able to facilitate some residential use over the commercial use. And that again is grandfathering parking, allowing for densities higher, and basically the grandfathering, the parking's the biggest thing there, and also reducing the process in terms of getting that done. Then lastly, there's the overlay that's associated with sites that are ½ acre or more. We're calling those opportunity sites. So again, increased density, reduced parking, lot consolidation. There are several of these that you need to consolidate lots in order to make the land large enough to be a ½ acre or more. These are very, very important in terms of complying with our housing element and illustrating that we can build on a large enough site that can potentially facilitate affordable housing on those sites. And then lastly, there was interest, and there still is interest, in potentially sites on either religious facilities or school facilities. These are typically in the commercial facility zoned areas, the zoning district. We have had interest from the community, but also concern. So with that guidance from the community, the suggestion and how I have it written is that we would consider an affordable housing overlay for the CF zone for churches and schools with needing more information. So we need to facilitate the conversations a bit more with these folks to really understand the densities they need, the amount of housing they're talking about, and how they can manage and how we can help them manage both community assets. The school as well as the religious institutions are very important to our community, as well as housing. We want to make sure that we're not displacing any of those other community assets. Then reducing constraints. So we can also streamline creating units by processing more quickly, reducing fees, updating standards again to allow for some units to be developed. We've definitely heard from the community, and we've talked about before, the parking requirements is something that has caused a lot of consternation and has stopped a lot of development, especially in the commercial corridor. There's several examples. The Montessori school has been for sale before and was left stagnant. Could be related to land price, but it's also related to the amount of square footage that has to be associated with the parking that's currently required. Okay, and lastly, the needs of the community. So it's very important trying to make sure while we're diversifying housing, creating more housing, protecting our housing, that we're also thinking about the needs of our community. That's today as well as in the future. So just looking at it today, our households are aging, continues to age. So it was 48 10 years ago, now it's 50. There's 23% of the population is 65 and older. There's also, of that 23%, the majority are over 85 years old. There's a large portion that lives outside the city. We have a lot of households that are cost burdens, and that basically means 30% or more of your household income is going towards housing. This also, that number not only is probably because of the housing prices, because there's not a diversity in housing prices or types of housing that's available in Mill Valley. So if someone is really interested in trying to get in the Mill Valley community, it may require going over and above what typically you would pay for getting into a housing situation. We have disability and poverty to think about, and then also fair housing and just trying to make sure that we are being an inclusive community. Inviting people into our community is very important. Right now, we have about 86% of our community that's identifying as white. This has become less over the years, and our younger generations are more diverse, but Marin County, the county as a whole, is still considered a segregated community. So while we talk about what we want to do for our community, we also need to figure out how we invite others into our community as well. So the needs include looking at fair housing, equal housing and housing opportunities, senior support systems. Universal design is something that we've heard a lot about, which is being able to adapt your housing or create housing that will meet the needs of potentially that aging population, seniors and disabled communities, and then homelessness assistance. And homelessness is going up in Marin County. A recent study just came out, and the amount of families that are homeless is of a significant concern from what I've read. And then lastly, we're looking to make sure that we're building healthy and sustainable buildings and creating the opportunity to collaborate, to really work on all of the above. That includes the Housing Advisory Committee and reporting annually to the HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. With that, this is just an illustration of the different affordability levels and where the locations are. This is based on census data. There's about 25% in this area that is low and moderate income. And then you'll see there is a little more diversity in terms of income levels as you get closer here to the freeway. So there's been some interest in making sure that our programs address the idea of providing opportunities and diversifying housing in all areas of Mill Valley to make sure that all neighborhoods are incorporating affordability and opportunity within their neighborhoods. So with that, I'll just end with, here's the sites inventory. You'll see that we are looking to scatter and address housing and filter housing and create housing opportunities and needs throughout the community, not just in one area. Next steps of the housing element, we've gone through our online workshops. We will be working to develop a draft housing element that will be for the public review in summer. But if anyone needs any information, it's available now on the website. Chapter 2 was part of this deliverable tonight. The housing needs is chapter 1, which is available on the website right now. And then the sites inventory is also available on the website. It just needs to be all put together and make sure that it's addressed in a way that the state of California requests the information. There also has to be environmental review as part of this, which will happen and be launched at some point once the draft is developed. So with that, I will get out of this, stop sharing, and turn it over for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Danielle. So members of the Housing Advisory Committee, do you have specific questions on the content that you just received that you'd like to ask? Anybody have a question? You can raise your hand. Oh, very good. Nobody has a question. Excellent. Good. So that means we can turn it over to the public. And Danielle, we're going to do this. We're doing 2 minutes per person. Is that our standard here for tonight?
Yes, it is. And I don't have the timer that I'm going to flash up, but I will. I have it on my screen, and I'll just let you know at the 2
So you'll start waving your hands when 2 minutes is up. People that are speaking. So what you do is you raise your digital hand, and Danielle will call on you. She'll provide an opportunity for you to speak to all of us. And if you could just please watch your screen, and when she starts to wave, try to wrap up your comments. That way everybody gets an opportunity to speak. We will be taking notes on everything that's being said. And like last time, we will attempt to answer the questions that you've got once everybody's had a chance to speak, so that we're being responsive. And before we kick off, I saw just in the chat that Charles Ziegler asked a number of questions. Number one, about how we are incorporating drought and a constraint on water into the process. And number two, there was a question specifically about the ABAG numbers, which have been, and again, that's the arena numbers, and the process that they went through in order to come up with this 865 units. Do you want to make a comment about those, Danielle?
Sure. The environmental document will have to assess water as part of that. So that will be something that will be assessed. There is conversations about that. And that'll happen with the environmental review. In terms of ABAG not supporting environmental policies, I don't have an answer on that.
I'll make a couple of comments. So, number one, I think everybody on the public, and we've said this before, but it may be just worth reiterating. So, the city of Mill Valley also had very deep concerns about this process. And I mentioned this in my comments in the beginning. The fact that we are a very constrained environment, that we face very grave fire danger, and that we also face a flood danger. And you can add to that also a water shortage. I mean, all of those things are very real constraints that we face. And so we took the decision early on, this is earlier on last year, to file an appeal with ABAG over these numbers, right? We filed an appeal, we wrote a letter appealing the process and appealing the actual numbers. So if you are looking at these housing allocation numbers and saying, this is a crazy amount of new housing that's going to come into Mill Valley, rest assured, we are with you on that, right? We also believe that these are very, very significant increases in housing. We don't think that building in a fire zone is very smart, right? And so we are trying to address that. And we've addressed that concern to ABAG themselves. In fact, 11 out of the 12 jurisdictions in Marin appealed the ABAG methodology as well as the RENA allocation. So, and all of them were denied. And that's not true just in Northern California, it's also true in Southern California, where they've also filed appeals. So there are a lot of concerns about this process. It is nonetheless a legal requirement, right? We are compelled by law to go through the process of creating a housing element. We need to continue to do that. I will say at the same time, Charles, I've also read those articles in the IJ about ABAG and about the state, I think it's the state controller, who has now gone through and said, hey, this process doesn't look completely fully baked. And I've raised that concern to legislative bodies within the state of California. And I think there might be an opportunity for us once again to make an appeal on this process as well as the actual numbers. So we're trying to make that more than just Mill Valley, make it more of a county, in fact, make it more of a kind of a Northern California appeal this time around. So we are very aware of these constraints that we are operating under. And we are also trying to, while we do this process, trying to address those things so that we create housing in a way which is safe and sustainable. So those are our comments, I think, on this process. And Patrick, if you'd like to make
I just like to add, well said, Councilmember Carmel, on the background with respect to our appeal to ABAG on the exorbitant number that we've been handed, and the basis for that appeal, is well said. Just like to add that there are serious implications, jurisdictions that do not comply with the housing element or fall short in meeting the state requirements. There's stiff penalties. It's becoming a very serious issue to cities. So, there's very serious implications, and the state is what I would refer to as a very heavy-handed approach here with housing. Obviously, if you look around, you read the news, it's a housing crisis, so the state is responding to that. But nevertheless, we're doing everything we can. You saw the map, the housing allocation is spread all over the city, to meet RENA, and through very creative measures, through rezoning and overlay zones and adaptive reuse and so on and so forth. So the programs here also serve to help achieve our number and implement the housing element as well.
Okay, good. So Charles, I hope that answers at least part of your question. So we're not going to open up for public time. Members should raise their digital hand. Danielle, if you could call on them and have them speak, and then again, pay attention to Danielle waving at you. so we can move the process along. That'd be
I
very
was going to
helpful.
add that Mr. Ziegler's hand is still raised, so maybe call on him first, because I know he had some
Okay.
comments.
Good point. Excellent.
Sure. And I'll just remind people that we have 2 phone call-in listeners. If you're interested in speaking, please press *9 to have your hand raised. So with that, Charles, I'm inviting you to speak.
Hi, thanks for, whoops, okay. Thanks for reading those questions. Yeah, my concerns are, is anybody integrate? I've called the MMWD, and I've called them probably for over 5 years, and they're approaching our water concerns, you know, in front of their nose. So has anybody integrated? They can't answer where the water's coming from. Sure, we're going to buy it from the East Bay, we're going to buy it from Sonoma, but has anybody even addressed integrating their plans with any of this? I know the answer is no, and we know that ABAG is a lobbying element, and it seems to me if all of the municipalities get together and acknowledge what ABAG really is, that there should be some pushback. I mean, it's a lobbying effort to shore up the financials, and it doesn't work if there's no environment. And you know that, and we know that, because we live in Marin County and it's a drought. I mean, I've lived here forever, not forever, for many years. And people that don't live here think, oh, this is beautiful. Well, we live in a desert, and it's always been a desert. And it seems to me the municipalities can gather together and take it some at a higher level, because you have to integrate the water. If the water's not there, nobody's there. Anyways, that's my sense, and I think that it would be nice to have some clarity on the EAH and where the money flow is going, because this is, we're retired, and it's very difficult to live here anyways, and all I do is see funds going out with less accountability because we have inflation of obviously 6-8% now, but before that it was just implied inflation of 5% that wasn't talked about. So those are my concerns.
Thank
And
you.
they're serious, because it affects every single community member, unless you're in the top 10th of a percent.
Thanks for your time. Okay, let's see here. I asked. I can't see this person's name. It might be Charles. I don't know if you're on 2 different.
I see C.S. Hyder is the next person, and then Paul McGrath.
Oh, and I think I have Clayton Smith. Clayton, I've unmuted you if you'd like to speak.
No, first off, on the issue of water, the only way to get additional water is to desalinate. And that is a dead issue. I think at least the original plans that we saw rolled out by MMWD. I participated in the anti-desalinization movement that's been on a law for many years now. And I don't think that's likely to change. The other constraint, I'd argue, is electricity and natural gas, particularly electricity. And luckily, we did not get the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant is now that closure has been arrested. So at least we're not going to lose that baseline electrical production. But it's very clear that the move to renewables is going to leave us back in almost like in the Middle Ages as far as energy in our homes. The renewables are just not up to snuff. Just read my Michael Schellenberg's book on the subject, and you'll get the picture. The other thing I'm really curious about is I hear all this talk about the studies and community input that you have acquired. And I find it all ludicrous, because in fact, I hardly find a person in this community who has any idea that any of this is going on. I think there's been an outrageous failure in outreach by your committee and by the city government and by the council to get this message out to people because of how this is going to impact them. And I can tell that just by the paucity of people that are attending this, even willing to, even having something to say about this, which is so impactful for their lives, is testament to that lack of outreach and that lack of knowledge in the community. People have no idea. And I ask everyone at any time I can, every time I go out and I go downtown to Mill Valley and have coffee down there at least 4 times a week. And I ask people who live in the town, no one knows what you're doing. Absolutely no one.
Thank you, Clayton, for your remarks. I have CS Hyder going to allow you to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Carolyn Hyder. I first want to say thank you for all the work you're doing on the housing element. I do understand how difficult and challenging it is. My concern is that the affordable housing all seems to be focused on east of Camino Alto. I say that because I look at the maps provided on pages 23 and 24, which show existing affordable housing all east of Camino Alto. Also because of the focus that is now being placed in the draft on building One Hamilton being the goal for 2022 to 2025. And the fact that there seems to be a concern about placing affordable housing west of Camino Alto. And I would just like to say that if we're going to honor the goal that this housing element be equally applied to all neighborhoods in Mill Valley, I would like to see further action on identifying those other areas that will be considered for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Okay, let's see here. Paula McGrath, I'm allowing you to talk. You there, Paula?
Okay. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Yes, hi. Thank you. And thank you for the work that the Housing Advisory Committee is doing on the housing element. I would like to say I've been following this process pretty closely because I live about 5 houses away from One Hamilton. My observations are somewhat in line with what Carolyn Hyder just said, but I wanted to go into a little more detail. I attended all the meetings where Janet Smith-Heimer presented her workshop report on the 4 affordable housing sites that were her top picks. They were the Public Safety Building, One Hamilton, Boyle, the portion of Edgewood, and a portion of the Mill Valley Golf Course along Linda Vista. And I had a email exchange today with Danielle just to make sure I was understanding the map right, the site inventory. And it appears that Boyle is no longer in the site, in the collection of inventory sites, and neither is this portion of the Mill Valley Golf Course along Linda Vista. And in fact, the only city-owned property that seems to be identified on the map is One Hamilton. And it's not just the northern portion of the 1.6 acres, which is designated for the project that is slated to be built by EAH, but the entire parcel. So I asked Danielle about that, and she told me that that map is going to be amended. But once again, the optics are that all the affordable housing is either already in east of Camino Alto, or it's going to be built in the future east of Camino Alto. And what happened to the site behind the parking lot behind Piazza D'Angelo? I talked to an affordable housing architect, and I provided some information in my email comments, which were submitted along with your packet, as to the number of units that could be built on that lot. And that I don't see that site on the inventory. It just looks like the city is trying to keep it away from downtown, trying to keep it off of Blythedale. What happened to the Pac Bell building? I didn't see that on the, I think it's on East Blythedale. I'm not sure what the address is there, but it just looks like some neighborhoods are getting preferential treatment, and that really makes the rest of us question what's going on here. So I'm hoping that this committee will really take a look at the inventory of sites and look at where they're concentrating all the dense affordable housing. I know they say that, oh, well, we're scattering the ADUs around. I'm sorry, you can't compare an ADU, the scattering of ADUs, to dense affordable housing. It's just not the same. So thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I think that is all. That was Carolyn, so her hand goes down. I think that's all the comments we
Okay,
have.
anybody else from the public like to make a comment? Well, I think we can address some of these questions, these very good questions that have been raised. So anybody else, but before we do that, let's just see if anybody else wants to make a comment. Is there anybody
Yes.
else?
Yeah, I have Dennis Klein here. So Dennis, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Hi, everybody. It's Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
I'd like to go long. Well, let's address the immediate questions. Everyone in this room or at this meeting knows that the Mill Valley Affordable Housing Committee has been submitting a specific plan along Miller for about a month now. And I was surprised. I looked right away to see the materials that you had posted did not have the map. So I said, okay, well, maybe tonight we're going to see some real progress, because that map has been somewhat frozen for a couple of months now with almost nothing on it. Now, the Mill Valley Affordable Housing Committee, in conjunction with several other groups who have been giving us a lot of input we feel good about, have had a whole repertoire of sites. The church, the Safeway, the Whole Foods parking area. You can say all kinds of things to completely dismiss these sites. And the worst thing I can't believe is they say, well, we talked to the owner. We're not interested in the owner. We're interested in Mill Valley. Once the community makes some decisions, then we can go to the owners. I heard the keyword overlay tonight. I was very encouraged to hear that. An overlay does not mean a zoning change. Does not mean any change in the disposition of the structure, other than the community is saying we're interested in this going through a change, which could open up the owners receiving phone calls of people saying, would you be interested in selling your property? Or would you be interested in a lease deal, where you get more money than you've ever had before for this, on and on like this. I'd like to know when the Miller Avenue specific plan, and regarding that lady that spoke earlier, this is right down the center of Miller Avenue on the right side, 600 feet deep, where we could have real development with great grace and elegance, and town and village type setting with 4-story buildings to the rear where no one can see from Miller, 2 stories in the front. We've been saying all this. It's going to take a lot of will to be able to think in these terms, but if we don't think in these terms, we're not going to make the numbers. We're talking 305 units along Miller. We're talking a Safeway lot and others. We easily have 1,000 units in this town if people would just look positively at the fact that if we build the housing and the workers live here, there'll be no more traffic, and we will be making a major contribution to shrinking the fire season and everything else that's wrong with this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Let's see here. Philip Hindenburger, I'm going to allow you to talk. Welcome, Philip.
Hello, thank you very much. I want to tell you all that we appreciate the work of the Housing Advisory Committee and all the workshops. I think it's been a real good effort to educate the community. One of the issues that the Community Housing Foundation of Mill Valley, which I am here representing today, is very interested in is pursuing affirmative plans to increase the amount of workforce housing. For many, many years, it's been acknowledged that some of our problems could be alleviated if we could somehow incentivize the development of workforce housing. And again, in the work papers today, there is a recognition that only a small percentage of our workforce is working and living in Mill Valley. And yet we don't have any specific programs designed to foster the development of workforce housing. And so I don't have a specific suggestion other than to consider incentives for builders who are going to be developing new housing, to give them some incentives to make some of their units available on a priority basis for workforce. If we don't address this issue, our traffic situation is just going to get worse. We're going to be really struggling to provide basic services for the community. As you know, many of our businesses are in a tough bind right now finding workers, and it's just going to get tougher. So I just think it's an omission in the plan. I'm sure it's not a conscious decision not to consider it. I think there's so many other issues crowding it out, but I do ask that the Housing Advisory Committee take it under consideration and see if they can develop an action plan to begin addressing the issue. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I just wanted to say I agreed with the person about community outreach, and I'd like to know what is being done to provide more outreach to the community and to respond to these plans. I don't see any signs up anywhere. I always try to have to track my email for it, and then when I'm sent a link, the subject line is Zoom. It doesn't even say, housing element or anything like that. And the other thing is, why are the final recommendations in the, being put together in the summer when most residents are, out of town, or a lot of residents are out of town, or it's a really slow time and people are traveling and in and out? I mean, that seems like an odd time to just collect all these final recommendations and send them on. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what that means about the final recommendations being, put together in the summer when most residents are, or many residents are doing other things in other places. And the other thing I want to say is one speaker talked about how bad the optics are of all the affordable housing being east of Camino Alto, and I just want to say I agree with that. And what about that? Thanks.
Great, thank you. Let's see here, Mary McGurty. Mary, can you hear me? Would you like to speak?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Oh, good, thanks. Hey, I would like to address the caller one back about the workforce housing, because I feel like that's somewhat of a virtuous deceit that has been promoted, in that we're learning through EAH and the One Hamilton project that we can't, it's illegal to designate housing for specific workers, or to require this, that the residents of affordable housing and affordable public housing must work in the city. It's just not. They can work anywhere, and they can indeed commute an hour away elsewhere to the jobs they already have. It's just, that's a fallacy, and I would really like it called out. I guess after a year of attending these meetings and hearing that outcry and knowing, no, it's illegal. I think that should be stated perhaps forthright in the housing element plan, and just be clear. This is what I think a lot of people are feeling frustrated about when we talk about the optics, when we talk about the initial consultant site recommendations, you know, there were 4, only 1 is being pursued in the area where it's always been pursued to develop affordable housing in Mill Valley, which looks like we're concentrating truly affordable housing. And by affordable housing also, if we could clarify, when we use that term, are we always speaking about public housing? Because that, I think, is also confusing, because in this reference to affordable housing, when it becomes public housing, and if that's what, let's say what we mean, affordable public housing, and where we are placing it and who it is for. And it is not for Mill Valley workers. It is for everyone. And I guess those are my comments tonight. Thank you.
You. I believe those are all the comments that I have. The hands raised.
Okay, so we received a number of public comments. Let's close public comments for tonight. And why don't we go through and address some of these questions? So Patrick and Danielle, maybe we'll just go through, and Matt, you might want to chime in on some of the stuff. So why don't we start with the housing selection, because it's something we've discussed before. And Matt, maybe you want to just start about how, given your experience, the local selection portion works and what we're hoping to achieve here in Mill Valley.
So there's a process that's quite common these days to have what's called a local live-work preference. And so what the sort of standard practice in privately owned affordable housing, and I'll talk about the distinction from public housing. One Hamilton is not public housing, it's affordable, which is typically deed restricted. There's a deed that runs with the land that has specific requirements, but it's quite common. And there is a fair housing review process that you need to go through to get it approved, but it's quite common in my experience, you can get what's called a live-work preference. So you would advertise broadly for the housing, not just in Mill Valley, but throughout the county and the region. You would typically run a lottery, an application process, and then a lottery. But then the way the preference works is it says that for those who meet the preference, and the most common type are live or work in the jurisdiction, they float to the top. So if one Hamilton ended up being, 40 units, 50 units, if you could put a preference on all 50, then what typically happens is that there's plenty of people that meet that requirement who are interested. So it's quite common in my experience that local workers are served. It is illegal to say we're only going to serve certain workers, meaning a certain employment type, unless the employer themselves owns the land and the housing. So that may be what the caller's referencing. And there is a fair housing review process that you need to go through on your plan, but I'm aware of this being approved quite commonly throughout the Bay Area. So I know it is legal, and I believe we would meet the requirements for it, and that we would be able to house a good number of people who already work in Mill Valley. And it's certainly the case that, I think the incomes are going to be targeted to working folks. So, if you're interested in worker housing, I think One Hamilton's a great opportunity.
Great. Thank you.
Matt, you might want to try to fix your microphone. It's coming and going a bit, just so you know. I don't know if you have any options to fix it a bit.
Yeah, good. So that's a question that we've gotten in the past, and Matt has tried to explain how this works a number of other times. But as he said, you basically reach the income threshold is the first sort of criteria. And then so long as there's, you're not creating a less diverse community as a result of a local housing preference, you are allowed to then screen based on where they live and where they work. So in case anybody couldn't hear precisely what Matt was saying. So that is the process that we've described in the past, and that's the assumption that we're working under going forward as well. So I hope that's understandable. Danielle, do you want to, first of all, make any other comments on that, and then maybe make a comment about the outreach that we've done to try to inform people about the meetings?
Sure.
And the things that we've had at prior meetings?
Sure. So yeah, just back to to the concept. We are interested in family housing and this idea of creating some opportunities for the local workforce. More has to be done on the analysis, like we're saying, to make sure that we can illustrate that we're creating some diversity with the new housing. As Matt has mentioned, there are a lot of examples out there. So the idea is that, you know, these are the interests for the One Hamilton project that we're moving forward, trying to work towards. In terms of outreach, we've done a lot of outreach, actually. It's been great to get as much input as we've received. We've had 2 online surveys. We've had 4 online workshops. We've had a joint planning commission city council meeting that was in person. Online has been very successful in terms of gathering information from people and having participation. You know, tonight we were up to 45 participants. If this were in chambers, we'd probably have about 5 members of the public. So I appreciate being able to have these Zoom calls and have more participation. In terms of outreach, we have extensive outreach that we've done, and email communications, as well as Mill Valley Connect that goes out to 10,000 emails. We're connecting with those that are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and other folks as well. So I will work to make sure that it's more widely known. In terms of the summer months, this process has been going on for a year. As I mentioned, the data is already available on our website. It's just not packaged. It will be packaged as a draft over the summer. That draft needs to have input, but you can provide input now based on the components that are out there on the website. I'm happy to email people information on that. And then also there is more iterations to come. We have the environmental review process that has feedback. We get the Department of Housing and Community Development's input. We then have to circle, turn around, and then have another hearing that will go to City Council. So we don't expect to have an adopted element until the end of the year. So there is definitely time for input now in summer months, as well as in months after school has commenced.
Also, if you just think about, so Mill Valley, like every other community in Northern California, operates under the same time frame, right? We need to have this thing done by the end of the year. And in order for us to have this done by the end of the year, first there's a 90-day review period by HCD, and that's going to be July, August, and September. Then it comes back to Mill Valley. We incorporate their comments, and there's another 60-day review period by HCD. That's October, November into December. And then, as Danielle said, it goes to the council. So there'll be opportunity for everybody to look at the document now, before it goes to HCD, while it's with HCD, when it comes back from HCD, and then when it's with the council. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for everybody to have a chance to read through it and provide input into the document. But we are also driven by a deadline. And that's not just Mill Valley, that's every community is driven by the same deadline. In order to get the thing into HCD so that they have their 90 days and then their subsequent 60 days, it has to be completed in June. Otherwise, we don't meet the deadline. If we don't meet the deadline, there are, again, very severe financial penalties as a consequence. So this is not a timeline that we've devised ourselves. This is a timeline that we're being given, correct? Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay, good. Other questions that we got. So the question about the site location, I'll make a couple comments and I'll invite others, Danielle, Patrick, and maybe Matt also, since you've been involved in this process. So true, we do have a lot of affordable housing east of Camino Alto, and true, Hamilton Drive is also east of Camino Alto. So I completely understand the concern of the residents in that part of Mill Valley, that's where the housing is being located. I'll make a couple of comments. Number one, we have, again, 900 units in the current cycle or the upcoming cycle of the housing element that for new housing. And again, 400 of those units need to be sort of in the low, below the local AMI. So affordable housing. And only about 10% of those are going to be coming from Hamilton Drive. So the other 90% is going to be coming from other locations in Mill Valley. And if you read through the work that we've done so far on the housing element, you know that almost all of that's going to be on the other side of Camino Alto. In other words, from Miller Avenue back into downtown areas. So that is in fact where a lot of this housing in the housing element plan that we've developed so far is going to go. A lot of it, hopefully, it's going to be along Miller Avenue. That's certainly the plan. Also on Camino Alto and in downtown. So that is where the housing element is going to end up in terms of providing the amount of housing. Secondly, I'll just make a couple comments about these sites. So we did go through, we did identify a number of sites. Hamilton Drive was regarded by the community as well as the Housing Advisory Committee as being the most attractive to achieve the funding that is required in order to do a publicly funded affordable housing development. These projects need to get federal low-income housing tax credits, and they need to score well. And it was the belief of the consultant, as well as the Housing Advisory Committee, as well as people in the community, that Hamilton Drive had the best opportunity of achieving those low-income housing tax credits. So that's why that site percolated to the top, but that doesn't mean that the other sites are off the list. So we are continuing to work with MMWD in terms of clearing the covenants that are on that site that would allow development in the future. That site is likely to get lower low-income housing tax credits than Hamilton Drive, but it's still an important site and certainly a site that we want to pursue. 411 Miller Avenue, which is right in the middle of Miller Avenue, is a site that we also want to pursue. However, it's got a floodplain associated with it. So it's got some issues that need to be addressed before it can be pursued. But it's absolutely a site that we are very interested in pursuing. And again, there's going to be something like another 350 units in total in Mill Valley in this housing element that are going to be low income. And most of those are going to be in this area. So I think when the dust settles, you're going to see a lot of affordable housing throughout Mill Valley. And I completely understand the optics short term, but this is how it's going to develop over time. And we are committed to developing these other sites. It's just that you got to start someplace. And this is the one that had the greatest appeal. And this is something that maybe Matt, you want to, since you're an expert in this area, you want to chime in on, but that's how we got to that site selection. And that's how this thing is likely to develop in the, in the years going forward.
Yeah, so hopefully my sound's better. I had a fan on that I turned off. Is that better?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I would just concur with what you said, Urban. I completely agree with the comments from a number of speakers that we need to identify additional affordable housing sites in other parts of the city. And I agree with everything you said about the opportunities along our transit corridors and, closer to downtown and in the downtown. I think the work that the council and the planning commission has been doing on these overlay zones is really exciting, and I think can go a long way to help facilitate that. So, and I hear some show me, in those comments, and I think that's a fair challenge for all of us to endeavor to make that happen in other parts of the city. So I personally, concur with that, and I think there's a lot of opportunity that we see here in the plan.
Great. Danielle,
Go ahead.
would you like to make any other comments on that?
I just want to circle back on, yes, this is sites. Unfortunately, the state of California has a lot of rules and regulations. I've heard the word, Safeway, Edgewood, things like that. So yes, they're of interest. If you look in the detailed chapter 2, we do talk about the 411 Miller, and we do talk about 300 East Blythedale being rezoned. And we do talk about Edgewood and trying to look as the next steps in looking at public owned land, making sure we look at studies to see how we can address those constraints of taking away easements and figuring how to build in a flood way, which is different than a normal flood zone. So these are important concepts. We cannot by law put any sites on the list without a lot of vetting and a lot of as the state would say, show me that it can be built. So these constraints mean that we can't put them on the site's inventory. Owner interest means that we cannot put things on the inventory such as Safeway. So there are some limitations of what we can and cannot put on in terms of the site inventory, but we have the programs that we should be using to flesh out our interest in making sure that we're further exploring sites to make sure that we are ready for the next 8 years, and that we're working hard to make sure that these harder sites are being put on the list and are going to be freed up and can potentially be built on 8 years from now.
Yeah, so 300 East Byfield, just so everybody knows, that is the Pac Bell building that's been referred to. And as Danielle says, that's something which is on the site inventory.
I'm not sure it's on the site's inventory, but it will be rezoned as part of the housing element process that will then allow us to put it on the site's inventory list.
Yeah, it's in the document that we got, in fact, in front of us tonight is the rezoning of that site. I think that addresses all of the questions that I saw that were raised by members of the public. So I realize that may be exhaustive, but I hope we've tried to provide an answer to many of the questions that you've got. You can always reach out to Danielle and ask her or Patrick and ask them directly any other questions that you've got. I'm sure they're more than welcome to get back to you on that. So I appreciate everyone's providing their questions, and hopefully that was helpful. So so with that, we're going to move on from public open time. We're now going to move on to, sorry.
We have another comment. You may want to respond in regards to, it was made via chat.
Go ahead.
I have one more comment. Why is the site known as Scott Highland Park, which was discussed at a meeting at the HAC as a parcel to sell to raise funds for the affordable housing, not on the inventory site?
Yep, I can answer that question. And Matt, you were there in that meeting also, so you can maybe chime in. So Highland Park, right, that was a site out by the golf course. That was never intended as a site for affordable housing. That was a site in order to raise funds for affordable housing. So, and we have continued to have discussions, within our group here about identifying sites in that area that could be used to raise money. It just wasn't critical path in order to get this project going. And that's why we moved on from that site to Hamilton Drive. We just realized that perhaps, and this was based on comments that we got from members of the public that have been involved in housing, just pointing out the fact that there's enough equity in the Hamilton Drive site itself that it wouldn't require the city contributing significant additional capital, liquid capital, in order to make that site a project which we can pursue. So that was the flavor of that discussion. That doesn't mean that those properties that are surrounding the golf course aren't opportunities for development in the future, and aren't opportunities for developing for a financial, in order to create a financial opportunity to develop other properties elsewhere in the city. Fair enough. Anybody else want to make a comment on that? Okay. Good. So with that, we're going to move on to the next stage of tonight's discussion, and now we're bringing it back to members of the Housing Advisory Committee. We're going to specifically talk about attachment 1. It's in your packet, and there are 8 goals that are in this packet, and there are a number of action items underneath each one of these. And this is a combination of programs and policies that we have already in place and feedback that we received at the 4th meeting of the Housing Advisory Committee, where we asked members of the public to provide input. And then you, members of the HAC, also provided input. And so all of that has been compiled by Danielle into this document, and that's what we've got in front of us. And now the question is there anything else as you read through this that is missing and that you want to add into this? We don't need to take things out of this. We need to add things into this. So we're going to go through this thing goal by goal, and I'll ask if anybody has a comment. You can raise your hands. We can make those additions to the document. And then again, if you could, while we go through this, identify the 3 or 4 things that you think are super important that you want to identify as priorities for the HAC and for the Planning Commission and for City Council going forward in order to achieve these goals with the housing element over the next number of years. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start with goal number 1, which is page 1 of attachment 1. It's housing maintenance and neighborhood quality. Danielle has got it up on the screen for members of the public to follow along, as well as for members of the HAC to follow along. Why don't we just go through, I'm just going to read down through my list of people here. I'll start with John Yolis. If you want to say if you've got anything to any one of these, there are 4 action items here. Anything that you want to add to this list? And you can say no.
I'm good with all of the goals under number 1. Goal number
Okay, very good. Okay, Greg Hildebrand.
I'm fine with the goals as well for all those.
Okay, very good. Matt Franklin.
Yeah, I'm good with the goals as well, Irvin. I'd highlight just a couple that I think are particularly important. So in honor of former Mayor Macaulay, I share the soft story interest and would encourage a prioritization of that. And then I'm less familiar with the current state of our 1-for-1 replacement regulations, but I think those are very important. So to the degree that there's opportunity in the tightening of those, and the clarity of those and the enforcement of those, I think that's probably the most powerful of the objectives here. And I think it's, very, very important, particularly for the 25% rental stuff.
So you said, sorry, housing, you said soft story, and what was the other one that you were highlighting as?
We talk about updating regulations that restrict the removal of rental housing and require 1-for-1 replacement of units.
Yep. Okay, got it.
I think that's probably the most powerful objective in this section, in my view.
Okay. Very good. We'll go back and we'll capture all of these at the end, but thank you. So for me, Danielle, number 1, the historic preservation, I think, adding a comment under the program objectives that we pursue a Mills Act designation for some of these historic resources that we've got in our city, I think is a way of preserving those going forward. So that would be under number 1. And other than that, I've got no other comments on this section. All right. And if you're all clear to go, we can move on to the second one.
One more comment, Mr. Carmel.
Oh, sorry, Stephen. Sorry. You know what? And I said that you were the new guy. You were going to go first. So
it's all right.
Yes.
I'm happy to go last. I'm the caboose on council.
Okay. Well, you're going to go first next time. So go ahead, please. Thank you.
No. So I have no additions to this section. I would just say, Matt, that the soft story project is moving forward with some alacrity. I think it's going to happen in a realistic timeframe.
Very good. And Danielle, if you've got no need for clarification, then we'll go on to goal number 2. Goal number 2 on page 2 of the appendix, housing supply and diversity. And this time we'll start with Stephen and go from there. Again, just programs that you want to add to this list primarily.
I don't have any programs to add. I think that maybe a bit more clarity on duplexes and duets. I hear some comments from fellow residents about, they live in large homes. They have opportunities maybe to house people. How can we better facilitate that through some of our programs and policies? I don't have a specific recommendation tonight. It's more of a question for staff based on what I'm hearing from people who approach me about that. And also what I heard at the Housing Element workshop breakout session that I attended, at least 3 people in that group claimed to have available space in their homes, but weren't really prepared to do a junior ADU or major construction. So I don't have an answer. I really have a question there. So that's my only comment.
Okay. Then we'll go up to Matt. Any comments, additions on goal number 2?
Well, so maybe Danielle and Patrick can help figure out where this fits. I think the joint city council planning commission session on the overlays is really exciting. I'd like to maybe hear a little more about an understanding of where we stand with those. And then I have I'd like to comment a bit on the kind of tabling or maybe the pause on the affordable housing overlay. I'm a little unclear where that landed. So I'm not sure what the right, it seems like that's, the overlays are kind of interspersed with some of these goals, and I'd be happy to follow their guidance of where that's appropriate here.
Yeah, we can talk about that under, we'll talk about inclusionary in the next goal, and then program 20 talks about the overlay, so I can explain.
All the overlays, okay. Yeah, so I don't have anything to add in this section. I do think that, and I think it's probably something you and Stephen and others may have considered. I'm curious about the potential for the ADU amnesty program. It feels to me like there might be pretty significant potential there, and that it might really surface a lot of stock that would be interesting to try to work with. Those are not easy programs to administer, but I wonder if it couldn't have a fairly nice punch in terms of attainable priced units, coming on line formally and officially.
Yeah, I can tell you that we did send a letter out to those that do have potentially illegal units. Now with the state law, especially regarding parking, the ones that continue to be illegal are very difficult in terms of, being built either over the property lines or in the front setbacks, things like that. But yes, amnesty programs can create the opportunity for new units for sure. And right now I have the program as looking into the amnesty program if we start falling below a certain number of units, just to make sure we're maintaining new opportunities with ADUs.
Okay, Greg Hildebrand.
Well, this looks like a lot of those things that all the programs we talked about under goal 2, I think are all in here. So I don't have anything else to add for these.
Great. John?
Right, thanks. The one program I would think maybe we want to think about accelerating is we're talking about determining if the 20% cap on micro units should be eliminated or perhaps I would say increased. And I think there's another document that talks about kind of addressing that by 2025. But I think if we could accelerate the time frame during which we look at eliminating that, that may be helpful to actually achieving, these housing element goals that we're setting before ourselves and that we need to achieve without risk of getting penalized by the state.
John, that's a really good point, because that we had a project come before us where we discussed this, and it would be helpful to have some flexibility there and not have it be something where we have to have a variance or something like that. With Lomito, that project was proposed as more than 20%, and the Planning Commission supported that. So I think we should probably not limit that. And I know the program is there. It's just when you put by 2025, I mean, maybe that covers it. It's there, it's going to be looked at, but how to accelerate that's a good idea.
I think the question is, I see Matt's chiming in on this as well. I think the question is, what's the appropriate number, and should there be a cap?
Yeah, we don't need to solve that problem right now, but we can identify something we want to get done.
Yeah, that'd be great if staff could take a look at that for us and make a recommendation.
Okay, good. So there seems to be good interest on that one. I also had interest in that one. Anything else, John?
No, I mean, I think, ADUs are obviously a really powerful program and one that spreads the creation of housing throughout the community potentially. And so I think it's been a great tool for us and certainly one that we should continue to keep in place.
Yep.
That's it.
Okay, so then it's on to me. So Danielle, so number 6, the non-traditional housing types, that would include, for example, co-housing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I would maybe call that out as being co-housing. I know that's something that you mentioned in the document. I think that's something that fits with the need for different housing types, as well as addressing smaller household size, and the fact that we've got a mismatch between household size as well to the type of housing stock that we're creating. So I think that would be worthwhile to call out there. And then I agree on the ADUs, obviously, and we have had a discussion in the past about modifying our ADU ordinance so that we can allow ADUs over the garage as something that we want to make sure that we do. So I would say those two things here would be helpful. Okay. And if there are no other comments, we can go on to goal number 3, which is housing affordability. And I'm going to let Stephen Burke, since I shamefully forgot to mention it the first time around, I'm going to have him go first again. And I know he's eager to dive in here. So Stephen.
Nice to watch you blush, Urban.
Yeah, no.
So I think my only comment here is that item 12, 13, and 14 generate financial resources, local affordable housing fund, affordable housing development assistance, maybe should not be limited to public funds alone. We have the emergence in Mill Valley of a community housing foundation, a community land trust, maybe some other interests from the private sector who would like to participate in assisting, whether it's with rental subsidies or matches or converting or purchasing homes and converting them to more affordable, diverse housing. So I would just suggest rewording this slightly, whether it's item 12, to reflect that it does not solely have to be funds from the public sector, but could incorporate private funds as well.
Danielle, would that be under 15?
That could be, but I can also make sure that they're connected. It's like,
yeah, I feel like there's a thread through
Yes.
those 3 or 4 that might connect. So that's all.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Matt? On goal 3, pages 4 and 5.
Yeah, I have nothing to add for goal 3. Thank you.
Okay, Greg, anything to add on goal 3?
No, nothing more to add.
Okay, John?
Yeah, I just want to make sure 2 things. One, that, and I think we are, but that we are going to continue to consider the possible sale of city lands, like the lands by the golf course and other sources or other parcels that could fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which could in turn fund the creation of affordable housing or revolving loan programs or homebuyer assistance programs, rental assistance programs. So that's number 1. And number 2, I'm pretty sure we have it in here, but I want to make sure that it's in more detail somewhere, but that we're going to continue to explore the possibility of a transfer tax that could achieve the same purposes. And that kind of ties to a couple different programs under this section.
So program 10 talks about continuing to work on the longer term housing opportunities for city-owned sites, which include the Edgewood parcel and Miller Avenue parcel, as well as the purchase or sale of property to leverage funding. But I'll make sure that the sale of property is also in there.
And then I wanted to actually have a little bit of a discussion with Matt and anybody else who wants to chime in about inclusionary requirements. We really haven't had a chance to talk about this outside of this committee. But at the last housing workshop, the 4th workshop, we had a chance to chime in. And I talked a little bit, and I see it reflected here about kind of evaluating the 25% inclusionary requirement. I expressed some concerns about that being a pretty steep number. And especially when you think about applying that to smaller parcels that are zoned both residential and commercial, that may disincentivize somebody to actually redevelop a parcel, with, where essentially 25% of the space is being built at a loss and operated at a loss. I think it may make more sense, and I'm curious to get people's thoughts, but I think it may make more sense on a larger parcel of which we have few, where the residual land value can settle and people are you've got multiple people chasing a large parcel, and, an owner's, land value, will be dictated by the market. But I just want to get people's thoughts, and Matt in particular, to see if, your thoughts about that 25% number, and also kind of bifurcating small lots as we're talking about doing. And I think we have addressed pretty well versus potentially some larger lots that we might be able to create eventually through on where there's excess land at either church sites or school sites or something like that.
Yeah, so, I appreciate your point, John. I was a little unclear on the overlays. It was one of my questions. I think I saw for sure on the small lot overlay that the inclusionary would be waived, which makes sense to me. To be honest, I think it's all about the deal, right? So I don't know that I have a totally clear picture of what to the extent there's a typical development associated with the office conversion overlay. And I'm not sure if your comment was more general than to the overlay. I think it's within range of affordability, and that it's pretty rare that it's actually the difference maker. And though I think your point of the size of the deal, that varies. The likelihood that it could be a true deterrent, goes up the smaller the number of units. There's no question. I think cities are ranging right now from kind of the 15 to the 25% is pretty common. So there certainly are cities that are lower. One thing the city could do is look at what some of the cities around us are. I think it's also something the planning commission could keep an eye on as applications come in and see if you really think it's a deterrent. So I guess I'd say I'd be reluctant to adjust it now. I think the overlays are really exciting. I'd be curious if there was, more discussion. I'm curious to understand them a little better. And certainly to understand what some of the deals could look like. I think we'd know a lot better if a few applications came in.
Yeah, I think the overlay idea is a great idea. I think my concern is that we just, and having been on the planning commission for 2 years, is we've yet to see and approve a project that would have, any significant amount of affordable housing. So, this is just a small town where there's just limited inventory in the first place, land inventory or redevelopment opportunities.
Okay, so when
I guess to me that argument cuts both ways, right? Because if you look at the distribution of our target, it'd be taking a pretty significant tool off the table.
Well, one thing I'll pitch out there is potentially using the overlay to test things, but also thinking about potentially if it's inclusionary, that's the issue, or other things, which being at the planning counter, I can tell you parking comes up over and over again. So in terms of prioritizing, maybe there can be a conversation of, is it parking regulations that should be looked at versus inclusionary? Could be if there's changes to parking regulations, we could see how that shakes out in terms of if we're getting any more projects. I have a feeling modifying parking standards could really start shaking out some new opportunities, but that's just based on being at the planning counter and listening to inquiries.
I think it's a great point, Danielle, and I don't know if I know we've talked about, in the overlay, those overlays, there's a plan to provide concessions there. And I think within a certain distance of transit as well, in addition to the overlay sites, is that right? if a site is proximate to transit, it could be
For the
eligible for a
overlays,
parking concession. Is that correct?
that would
That
be
applies
density
for
planning.
ADUs under state law, but
Well,
Yeah.
well, sorry, Patrick, this is something I was going to bring up, and John, I didn't watch that meeting you guys had, but I guess I would have interpreted the staff report to raise the possibility of aligning the parking and the overlays with the state density bonus law. And so I think that was the reference to the proximity of transit. And I would say that law is quite commonly being used in a lot of communities and really works. And so I think that's an interesting point to consider, that furtherance, which, frankly, under the right conditions is a right for a developer anyway, and might be where the city would end up, anyway, as far as how that law is written.
Danielle, I have one, this conversation triggered a thought that came up at a planning commission meeting where, the discussion about whether it be eight units with one affordable or micro units on that project across from the post office. And one of the things, and I don't know whether the discussion about the 25% inclusionary just triggered this thought about, when there's an option to actually pay a fee to not do something, it seems like we ought to not have that be possible, and that they need to provide so many, and not just be able to, well, if you can't do it, then you pay a fee and then it goes away, because that seems counterintuitive to what we're trying to do here. So I guess what I'm getting at is I would like to see the 25% stay in there and have some language that prevents somebody from, a developer, from just paying a fee to get rid of the one affordable unit.
Yeah, Greg, I get it. And I know we all want to have affordable housing at the end of the day. But I do think options at the end of the day will end up producing more housing units overall. And I think giving people options of flexibility is part of succeeding in producing housing. I'll just go on to say right now, the San Francisco Bay Area's construction prices are essentially the highest in the world, and trying to pencil a high density market rate housing development is getting, especially with interest rates rising, is getting incredibly challenging. I spoke to a former colleague 2 days ago who's got a prime site right near Pacific Heights in the city of San Francisco, a large project, and they're having trouble attracting equity to one of the best pieces of land in the entire country, basically. And so I just think giving people options is going to actually help produce housing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and
I don't know if this might just, this is a pretty important and involved topic, so I'm not sure we're going to resolve it here, but I guess to Greg's point, John, is, what would we do with that fee money? So we see how hard it is for us to put that money into developing hard units. And so I too would be very slow to try to provide a fee out option. I think it's hard to get the fee amount right. I also think that, it's so hard for that money to actually translate into a hard unit that I just would be slow to do it. But I understand your point. I'm living it every day too on the cost. And, maybe it's another discussion that we ought to spend some time on.
Well, I think what we
probably.
could do,
I mean, honestly, my bias is with it being that high. Land sellers, people are very slow to sell land in the first place, and it takes a long time for when people have been getting offers and probably passing on them over time, and then they finally decide to sell, but the market isn't there for them. It's just not a very efficient market. And the more difficult we make it, and the higher the hurdle it is for people to make something pencil, the less of anything that ends up getting produced. And to me, 25% is a huge number. And I referenced at our last meeting that when San Francisco bumped its number just from 12 to 17%, housing applications fell off a cliff. They dropped by 2/3. I'm sure that picked back up over time, but it's now, I think, settled closer to 20%. You know, there's kind of that step up that was happening according to San Francisco's policy. But you know, I think the reality is if we make it too high a hurdle, in general, I think it's going to be hard to produce anything. I don't think we're going to get many people, you know, providing housing in the first place.
Yeah, but John, come on, there wasn't a 2/3 drop because of a 5% on inclusionary. It's just not that big of the equation.
Well, it's a 40% increase, you know, in that.
Yeah, but it's a small piece of the go or no go financial equation of a pro forma. I mean, you know, that's there's not causation there. And I appreciate your point that there is some level that's too high, but I'd be very reluctant to make a change here. And I'd be happy to participate in other, you know, other discussions about the level, and we could look at some pro formas to, you know, it's really important to contextualize this in the broader picture, I think.
Our ordinance does provide, it does talk about flexibility in the rules and deed restrictions and, you know, and having other opportunities. So it could be that we're also providing more examples, as John, you mentioned, these flexibility of options of how to package. Maybe they don't all have to be deed restricted. There's also affordability by design. We've had some projects proposing, right, the micro units as an example of affordable by design. So maybe just more of a packaging of information of different ways people can put together an inclusionary option might be something to explore. Rental versus ownership is another example. So yeah, I think I appreciate all the comments, and I think we can flesh out a program a bit more based on the discussion tonight. So I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. That was a good discussion. Danielle, my only comment on this section would be to call out specifically, I think per Stephen's comment on the transfer tax, maybe under 12, that's specifically something that we would be looking at as being a funding mechanism for being a participant in creating housing in the city of Mill Valley, a property transfer tax, something that we haven't done in the past here in Mill Valley, at least not on a significant scale. Okay, good. So thanks for all your comments on that. We're going to go on to goal number 4, which is redevelopment opportunity and design. That's on page 5 and bleeds over onto page 6. And Greg, do you want to kick things off if you've got any comments on any of those?
Yeah, sure.
Not comments, any additions to any of those programs?
Well, let me, Danielle, let me ask you this, because there's a couple of things in looking at this is the summary sheet, but when you looked at, you know, your full attachment 1 and then also attachment 2, I went through and that's kind of the draft of all this, and it has it in more detail. And I saw a couple things in there. A lot of what we're talking about tonight has to do with, you know, what's feasible to get a number of units and make it something that people can develop and have enough space to do that. And I think what was put in there for parking, I noticed in one, you know, under one of the numbers, it talks about in one of the overlays, it says reduce parking for units less than 1,000 square feet. And that one was with the opportunity site housing overlay. And then under affordable housing overlay, it talked about 1 parking space per unit that is 1,000 square feet or less. But my recommendation would be to not put a specific number of parking places in there, because I think there needs to be flexibility. And one of the things that I would, you know, and I think you've included to some level, you have bike parking in there. I think secure bike parking is what we heard last time as an alternative, you know, to numbers of parking spaces. So I think because secure bike parking could hold a e-bike, or it could just provide something where you didn't have to have, you know, an alternative to a parking space. And then another thing I mentioned in our last was, the option, and again, on the list of flexibility, is to have car sharing or bike sharing kind of be part of the development. Because if you had, say, one or two cars to share in a zip car type way or another, then somebody maybe didn't need to have a car, and then you wouldn't have to require a parking space for that unit. So I think in order for everything to really, for us to meet these goals of numbers, like you said, the biggest issue that keeps coming up is parking. So I would like to, to consider that again, put secure bike parking on there and not have a specific, because I know you talked about short term for this housing element, we'd say one parking space for 1,000 square feet. And long term, we'd look at this other whole list of factors. And I think, long term is 16 years. I think we should probably be looking at this short term and think about all those factors that were on that list that I don't have in front of me, or I can't. Oh, maybe they're right there in the fine print. But I think you've covered, those are the two main things there. And then the other having to do with the sustainability and the green building code. I think you hinted at in the larger document that the green building code is kind of updated automatically. But if we reference, say, Cal Green Tier 1 here, and then say the county and the all the jurisdictions end up going to Cal Green Tier 2 as part of the new green building code, I'd just like to see us not be limited to put in, say, Cal Green Tier 1 when we might be able to be at Tier 2, or like Urban is always saying, is that we really want to be in conjunction with what the county's doing. And so all the jurisdictions and all the different cities are on the same page with this. And so that and let's see, there was one other thing having to do with that. Oh, I'd like to put something in there that relates to that connects the cap as far as those sustainability goes, because sustainability design, our cap, which is also going to be in the its own element. I think these two are kind of connected. So if as part of the green building code and sustainability and design guidelines, that is if our climate action plan, there could be some reference to that in here.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, for your comments. John, do you have anything to add to your colleagues' comments?
I actually don't have anything to add. I think these overlays are great, and I probably neglected to say, Danielle, I think you heard everybody's comments, and I really feel like my comments were heard at the last meeting and incorporated in here already. So thank you.
Great, Matt. Anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple things. So what is the status on the affordable housing overlay for the is it the CF zone?
Yeah, so the idea, as part of community outreach and feedback, I did ask the question of the community's interest in rezoning CF zones, which are mainly churches and schools and some public parking lots, if they should be rezoned to allow residential use. And there is some unsure questions about that, and there is some no to the interest based on the feedback being wanting to know more about the housing that would be provided and how those larger lots can balance the community asset they have today, schools and churches, and not displace that use, but also provide the affordable housing. So I think the general consensus was, let's learn more from these users of how they're interested in providing housing, but also how they plan to balance the needs and that community assets. Once we have some information on there, then we would move forward for that overlay.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know how much I think these overlays can be a little confusing. You know, what's powerful about them is they're only activated if the owners choose to. Right. So I wouldn't confuse the opportunity of an overlay with any sort of a push or a mandate to vacate a site. And my experience is that we have very strong leadership of the ownership of all of those CF sites that we're talking about. And I think, they're only going to take advantage of the overlay, if it's in their interest. And these are all, I think, on this list because they are arguably dramatically underutilized sites as far as the potential in the site relative to the context that they sit in their surrounding properties. And so there's just an abundance of opportunity to frankly generate resource to preserve the current use. Right. So I've seen this be a very powerful tool and used exactly for these religious institutions or schools or others. And it creates value in the underutilized part of the land that then typically is invested in the preservation of the, religious facilities or the school facilities, and actually strengthens their permanence or sustainability in the community. So I actually think the tool is a powerful tool to achieve exactly what the concern is. And again, it's it often gets kind of confusing, I think, when we're doing this zoning, because it feels like it's mandates and other things, but it's an option for the owner. It's an opportunity. They can choose to take advantage of it or not. So I don't really see any practical way that it pushes them out of our community, which I don't think anyone would want. And I just think it's a very powerful tool. I think it's a tool that, frankly, HCD would be very excited about, that would enhance the city's likelihood of approval. And I think these are some of the best sites for opportunity, in the city. And again, they're not going to go anywhere until and unless the owners of the site, want to engage in that discussion. So I really, and again, I respect that it was the two, actual more formal voting influence bodies that considered this, but that would just be my 2 cents. And, I think it'd be a missed opportunity to not include, kind of raise that affordable housing overlay to the level of the other three in terms of action. Okay. And then, Greg, I just had a quick comment or question on your parking. I was a little confused whether you want to leave that entirely open, or maybe whether you want to say something like the parking shall not exceed a 1-to-1, and we shall consider less than 1-to-1 if some combination of these other circumstances are in place. Because I do think it's a big step for this town, and you know this better than I do as chair of the planning commission. It's a big step to create a different level for these overlays, even if it maybe isn't enough. And I'm very sympathetic to everything you said and agree with everything you said about the circumstances under which it might get lower.
I think Matt, that's brilliant. I think that achieves exactly both things. It doesn't limit us, and it gives a starting point. So I think that's great. Do you want to, Danielle, do you want to make a kind of a note of that
Yeah, this is a PDF, so shall not exceed 1-to-1. We do have to be careful. These projects that have the overlay are subject to objective standards. So while we want to provide flexibility, we still have to have an objective standard in place. So
right, but I think what Matt just said was talking about, instead of just saying reduced parking and then here's the list of things, so it's vague, you could, I think what Matt was saying was that you'd have, one space for units under, and that could be, there was flexibility depending on if they met any of the following criteria. Wasn't that kind of what you were saying, Matt?
Yep.
Okay.
So then you'd keep some certainty of a max and also the possibility of more flexibility under those conditions.
Okay.
Okay.
And just to add to what Matt was just saying about those overlays, because I heard a number of things from the community as well about, even if the RENA numbers, it doesn't help with the RENA numbers, doing those overlays for all those other sites just is kind of good master planning for the future. And our goal is not to get anybody to leave. It's to just have opportunities when they might occur for underutilized sites. And because there's so much land that isn't utilized, it doesn't mean that the current use has to go away. It's just getting a little bit more density.
So I think what you're mentioning is an application process to apply for the overlays if you're not on the site's inventory. So that's a great idea that's not incorporated in here that I will work on incorporating somehow.
Okay, yeah, and you mentioned it in your in attachment 2, you had something in there about master plan, but there and a comment from the community, but with the concern that there might be some confusion between the overlays and the master plan. But I think what you just said, if you have something in there that kind of goes beyond just meeting RENA numbers and it's looking at the big picture for all other underutilized sites like Safeway and Whole Foods and others, that the parking lots might get smaller and there might be something there.
Well, yeah, okay. I just want to clarify, we're not doing a master plan.
No,
but it would allow for this application of the overlays. Okay.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Can we move on to Stephen?
I have no additions to this section.
Okay, good. So we're going to go on to goal 5. Stephen, why don't you kick it off?
Urban, can we stay on that goal 4 real quick?
You want another bite of the apple? Is that what you're saying?
I want to chime in after Greg and Matt did.
We don't need to solve the
CF
problem
zoning.
here tonight, right? We just need to make sure we've got all the programs on the sheet.
Yeah, but I want to clarify one thing. So obviously, I chimed in at the last meeting, and I totally agree with what Matt and Greg were saying about the CF zoning housing overlay. But Danielle, can you clarify why it is just an affordable housing overlay and not a housing overlay? In other words, if we're trying to give people opportunity, institutions opportunities to stabilize their facilities, are we saying that only affordable housing developers would somehow, that the zoning would only be suitable for affordable housing use, or could it be suitable for, mixed income housing use, i.e. housing that has 25% affordable or whatever the requirement in place is?
Right. Maybe it should just be modified to say CF zoning overlay.
They're two very different things, right? I mean, they're two very different things, and there certainly are communities that aggressively use affordable housing overlays that are what they sound like. They're specific to affordable housing. They create a lot more use potential on the site, so they create value for the owner, and they unquestionably create a more limited market on the purchase side. And so I think if we want to have a realistic shot at the 300 or 350 or 400 of our 850 that are below moderate, I understood it to be what it said, that it was affordable, and I think it's smart. And I think it would be compatible with the, you're still upzoning that site significantly, creating a lot more value for the owner than they had otherwise, but you're also increasing the chance that you actually get some affordable built in town, and in sites that I think meet a lot of what we're after in terms of proximity to transit, in a more, in further west in the city, and a lot of other things.
And it is a strategy to meet our moderate, our RENA allocation for moderate and
They're below moderate, right?
below moderate.
And there might even be less parking required for some of those types of projects that aren't, maybe as car heavy.
So I think that goes back to really understanding, this concept of tapping into interests of these local groups to really understand before we develop that overlay a bit. But I do understand that it would be looked favorably, and it could be something that we might have to do actually to get the housing element adopted or certified by HCD. So time will tell on that, but I appreciate the input and I'll work on addressing comments on that.
Okay, any other comments on number 4? Okay, on to number 5. Mr. Burke.
No additions, thank you.
Okay. Matt.
Sorry, can you back end me on this? I was writing a response in the chat, so go ahead. I'll come
Sorry,
back. You come back.
we're on number 5. It's on page 6. It's government constraints identifying regulatory incentives, 21 through 24.
Yeah, I'm good on that. Thank you.
You're good. Okay, John Yolis.
Yeah, I've had a chance to comment, and I think everything's been addressed. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Hildebrand.
I kind of jumped ahead, and a couple of those things that I mentioned were part of 5.
Yes, I noticed
Like
that.
20, sorry,
Yeah,
22, and so I think I've already said my piece on that.
Yep. Okay, good. And then for members of the public, I'll just point out that number 21 is the comment I made earlier on 300 East Blythedale, which is the Pat Bell building. So that's where it gets addressed in terms of a rezone. Okay. So then on to number 6, which is fair housing opportunities and special needs populations. This is items 25 through 29. And why don't we just start with Greg?
I don't have any, let's see, I don't have anything to add. I think we've got all the programs in there that we talked about. I really like that one idea about the what they're doing in Truckee. So I thought when you mentioned that in some of the attachments and the detail of that, the tenant matching local workforce lease to locals,
yeah.
the lease to locals. So I thought that was a brilliant idea. So I totally support that. If there was a way to move that kind of thing forward.
Yeah, think about that when I ask you for your top priorities here. John, anything to add on items under goal 6?
Nothing to add, thanks.
Okay, Matt, anything to add on goal 6?
No, I'm good on that, Urban. Thank you.
Okay, and Councilmember Burke, anything to add on goal 6?
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay, great. Good. So we've got 2 more goals to address, and then we've gone through the document. And it's goal 7. It's on page 8. Has to do with sustainability. Greg, you've already made.
Yeah, sorry. Urban, you're cutting out.
Urban, your internet is unstable. People must be at home.
You need to add?
No, Daniel, you
I think you made a number of comments already about, especially number 31, right? So anything else?
Well, and the green building and energy conservation, I already addressed that. I can now, yeah. So Daniel, you
can you guys hear me?
Got that already. We can now.
Okay, great. So you had already made some comments on, I think, primarily item 31. Anything else that you'd like to add?
No, just that's where, about getting alignment to the cap and the county and the green building code update. So that's, sorry, I jumped out of.
That's all right.
Out of goal.
Sorry. John, anything to add on goal 7, sustainability?
Nothing to add, thanks.
Okay, Matt, anything to add on sustainability?
That looks great. Thanks.
Okay, and Councilmember Burke, anything to add on item 7?
Nope, no additions.
Okay. Finally, okay, so last goal, which is community and government collaboration, bottom of page 8. Stephen, you want to start? Anything to add?
Nothing to add. I just want to comment on number 33. I feel both as a citizen, as a council member, that staff in particular has bent every effort to engage the community through the channels of communication that are available to us, and have been responsive to every inquiry and every comment. And if we can improve it, we will. Any constructive suggestions to help us improvement are welcome. But I believe a great deal of effort has been made, and I want to thank you for that. That's my only comment.
Okay, great. Matt, anything on community and government collaboration? Bottom of page 8.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. John, anything to add on that item?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add on to what Stephen was saying, which was, you know, my experience with this process is that there's been a really great effort to reach out to the community and get input. If I'm not mistaken, I think we had over 1,000 respondents to the survey that the city sent out about this process. I think at the second to last workshop I attended, there were maybe 85 or more participants at that one, and all of them were extremely well attended, you know, by dozens and dozens of people. So kudos to staff. And along those lines, I guess I would just want to say that obviously a lot of these things we're talking about implementing take different amounts of time on, you know, on staff's behalf. And I'm sure, Danielle, you're thinking about how do you allocate your time and the rest of city resources. Patrick, you're probably thinking about this too. And while, you know, there are some, I know we want to implement every single, you know, program in here. There are certainly some that are going to have a quicker return on staff time than others. And so I just want to make sure that we continue to, you know, make sure you have the staff has the resources to implement. And of course, I'm sure you're prioritizing, you know, in the most sensible way possible.
Great, thank you for those comments. And then lastly, Greg, any comments on?
So the only thing I just wanted to also compliment staff on, like the MV Connect, I find really helpful, even for me being part of the planning commission and you know, CAP Climate Action Plan Task Force and the Housing Advisory Committee. I still get a lot of information as a member of the community, and I think would encourage everybody to pass that on as an avenue to be connected to the city, because I think that's a really good document and it gives everybody a lot of info for everything.
Yep. And I'll just make 2 comments. One, on the city website, you can sign up for any number of notices for different departments to alert you when they've got a meeting coming up. Number 2, everybody should be receiving the MV Connect, which goes through and identifies the meetings that are coming up, as well as meetings that have already occurred and what the outcome of those meetings was. And then thirdly, for those of you who are on this call who have got a particularly strong interest in housing matters, I literally cannot recommend highly enough the HCD daily newsletter. Everybody should be receiving this. It's sent out by HCD. I get it around lunchtime every day, and it's a number of articles that are all hypertext to link you to the actual document, going through housing issues throughout the entire state of California. And it is super informative in terms of understanding what the issues are and what other communities are doing. And you really get a great sense of how housing policy is being created, as well as the challenges that cities are facing in order to create housing throughout the entire state. It's fascinating. So I really recommend that everybody that's here, that's interested in this topic, really follow that and subscribe to those different sources. So very good. Thanks, everybody. Daniel, do you have any questions before we go into the last bit of tonight's agenda? Any questions based on the discussion that we've had so far?
No, this is great. Thank you. I'll also be out there for the pancake breakfast if anyone wants to talk to me then.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Good. Okay, so members of the HAC, last thing, and let's do this kind of in a quick way. I don't want to get into a long discussion, but it would be really helpful, I think, for Patrick and Danielle, actually for the planning commissioners that are on here also, since you guys are generally the tip of the spear when it comes to these issues, to understand roughly where our priorities lie. Like, what are the things that people think are the most important? I think, John, you kind of just made a comment to that effect, that you got to be able to prioritize the activities that you're going to do, given that you've got limited resources. So I think it'd be really helpful just to understand where everybody's head is in terms of where the big high leverage items are for us going forward. And maybe I can just start with our housing expert, Matt, and I'll go to John and then Greg and then Stephen, and then I'll go last. Matt, are there things in particular that you want to make sure that we're focusing on over the next number of years out of this list that you've got here?
Yeah. So number one for me is the implementation of the overlays. I think that's a really powerful and exciting tool. And either 1A or 2 is including the affordable housing overlay for the CF zone. So I just have seen those work to great effect. I think they can be a much more efficient and flexible is not the word, but kind of adaptive way to get similar things done to a specific plan, but they can be much more quickly utilized and have higher impact. So I really think that that's an exciting, the biggest excitement here. It could really change how we plan around our transit corridors, which is where the action is. Secondly, I guess I'd highlight number 10 on goal 2, and it's specific to the publicly owned land, but I guess I would modify it a little to say that the discussion we've had about we need more 1 Hamiltons, we need it in other parts of the city. We need to bring together all the tools we can to try to remove the barriers to that and to help it happen. And so that would be my number 2, and I think that can fit with the overlays. I think it fits best in that category, but I wouldn't limit it just to the publicly owned land. We added the sale to that at John's urging, which I think is good, or it was implied to begin with, of maybe some parcels to pursue that other strategy and marry that up on Miller. And I guess my number 3 might be that 1-for-1 replacement, but again, I'm a little less familiar with where that action is, but I think something in that arena of protecting our rental units, keeping our eye on the rental unit owners, being in conversation with them about what they need. Many of those are quite old units. So whatever we can do to help them keep those units in good shape. The 25% rental stock is I think a challenge for us in terms of getting the affordable mix that I think many of us would like to see. Affordability mix we'd like to see in town and to match up better with these state goals. And 25% is a lot of units. And I think really being focused on how we preserve those, being in deep conversation and a listening mode with the owners of those units and doing whatever we can to help them and to prevent conversions, of course, or loss of units. So those would be my 1, 2, 3.
Okay, very good. John?
Okay. Not to repeat, so I will repeat one.
You can agree with somebody else. There's no problem.
Yeah, no, I will. I mean, I'll agree with one. That is, I do think the CF zone sites, these are longer term, but I think it represents a lot of untapped potential that can do good on multiple fronts. It can help stabilize, the institutions that own land, and it can certainly help provide sizable incremental, new production, and especially production of affordable housing, whether it's 25% or 100% affordable. And we can certainly have a debate about, what's in the best interest of the city, of the housing, the housing element of meeting these goals of those owners and of their stability. And then number 2, just again to reiterate, land sales. I know transfer tax may be challenging. Danielle and I have talked about this before, and she thinks perhaps, talking to other municipalities or maybe a county-wide effort is something that could be considered. But it sure would be great if we had more resources to help, basically, build the CF zone affordable housing units if we go the 100% affordable route someday. And we'll need as many resources as we can get for that and other programs. So yeah, both land sales and transfer taxes to help support the larger affordable housing trust fund. And then the one thing we didn't talk about tonight, I did mention it last time. There wasn't a slot, and it kind of skipped my mind. But and we may need to discuss this later. But I guess about 7% of our current 1,100 rental units are designated as short-term rentals. So that's about 80 units. And I don't know what, it doesn't seem to be problematic perhaps at this time, but it is 80 units that are out of the supply of long-term housing that could help provide long-term housing solutions for people. So again, 7% doesn't seem unreasonable at this time, but I'm certain, certainly it's been growing in all likelihood over time, bit by bit, and we may want to take a look at that as another way to basically create more permanent housing solutions.
Okay, good. Mr. Hildebrand, your top
Okay.
3 or 4.
Top 3. So the zoning code update, I think that's priority 1. And a lot of what we've been talking about tonight involves that. So I think to me, that's top priority. The parking ordinance, I think, to try to make future projects like 510 Miller successful and get as many units as possible in housing and affordable housing. I think that's absolutely critical. And I think we need to not push that into future housing, future elements. I think that has to go in there now. And then thirdly is, a comment that has made a couple times, in previous meetings about developing a master plan. And I know that isn't about the housing element, but in particular, maybe getting a specific plan for Miller, giving that another go, because I know that that was very difficult the last time. But as we walk up and down Miller, and we just see so much potential, right? I mean, and the rezoning is the first step, but I think the community, especially the ones that are saying, why is everything east of Camino Alto? If we had a master plan and we can show how we're achieving some of the ideas on how to achieve that, and had a specific plan for the future of Miller based on now the housing crisis, and maybe a fresh look at sustainable design and getting the density where it needs to be, maybe that would help. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Stephen.
I have 4, although
That's okay. You're allowed
4 could be 3. So number 1 is item 12, generate financial resources.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is rezoning, and item 20, the overlay. Number 3 is parking standards, and it relates to number 4, which is developer incentives, and item 11. So number 22, number 14, and number 11 go together in my head in terms of enabling and incenting developers to actually act. So I would put those in a bucket together as number 3. So 22, 14, and 11 are my third.
Okay, very good. I have a combination of everything that's already been said, but just for the record, I agree with Matt on these public sites. I think there's more work to be done here. I would include, and I know we can't include it in the site inventory, but I would include something that John mentioned last time, which is these church and school sites, which are large potential, which really need to be considered in the future. But certainly public land sites, I think there's number 1. Number 2, agreeing with Councilmember Burke on sources of funding. I think is really critical so that the city can play a more active role in the development of, for example, these smaller lots along Miller Avenue, because I think we're going to need somebody to provide some incentive for private developers to go in and actually create some housing on these things that's going to be attainable, at least for some citizens. I think if we can do that, I think we really have an opportunity to do some pretty great things in the city. So I think that's the next thing. I'm going to add something which hasn't been mentioned so far, which I think is really important. I think streamlining process, I think, is really critical. This is something I thought about a lot when I was a planning commissioner. We got a little bit down the road. It's something that we've talked about in the planning commission. I know it's like one of these holy grail things that you always try to get to, but making it, making a simpler system, a system that's more expedient for developers, I think is something that we hear a lot on planning. I know that's something that Patrick, you and I have discussed in the past. I think that's something that's really a critical thing to to kind of get established. It may not be something that we do alone in Mill Valley, it might be something that we do with partners throughout Marin County, but I think that's an important thing. And I know it's in the document here, and I think it's something that I think is really critical to get this, achieve what we want to try to achieve. I'm going to just throw in John McCauley's, because, in memory of John, although he's no longer with us, I'm going to throw in his soft story. I think, we should probably get the soft story done so we're protecting existing housing. We don't lose that. And thankfully, this is also a bit of a bone to our planning colleagues here, because they're already working on it. So it's not something new. It's already something which is in process. But I think it's really important that we continue that work and finish it off. And it can be the John McCauley Memorial soft story ordinance. But it's important to protect the housing that we've got also. So those are the things which I think are important. And if I was going to add one more comment, the thing which stuck out to me the most in all of the documents I read is the fact that half of Mill Valley homes have got 2 people or less. And I really think, and I know it's going to be, it's embedded in everything that we're talking about, but the concept of like small units, micro units, co-housing, I think this is really just important. And it's where we're going to end up, because that's how you manage to do 865 units. But it's also just happens to fit very well with what this city actually needs. And I think it provides youth into our city. It provides an opportunity for people to work in our city. It provides an opportunity for people who have now become empty nesters in our city. So I just think that's a really great opportunity for keeping people in our city that have been residents for a long time and attracting new people into our city. So it's kind of embedded in a lot of things that we're doing, but I just want to call that one out in particular. Okay, Patrick and Danielle, do you need anything else from your Housing Advisory Committee this evening?
No.
Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the public, for your comments and for your questions. I hope we've been able to answer your questions. I hope you found this to be interesting and edifying discussion. Look forward to receiving more comments from you and more input into this document. Members of the Housing Advisory Committee, thank you for your time preparing for this evening's discussion and your thoughtful comments. It's all incredibly helpful. Everybody should be looking next step for a draft of the housing element, which will be available for review for a full month, probably in the month of June before it goes off to HCD. Exact timing TBD, but we'll let everybody know when that's going to be. And again, there'll be plenty of opportunity to provide more comments on the housing element document before it actually gets implemented at the end of this year. And with that, I will both make a motion and accept the motion to adjourn tonight's meeting. And with that, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, all. Take care.
Thank you, Danielle and Patrick.
Good
for your
night.
work.
Thanks to the public who chimed in tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
And 9:01. Good work. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Hey, Danielle, that document was great. You really brought a lot of everything we talked about. I was